Victoria Ames. And Selectmen's Rep, Charlie, you're written down here, actually. I have my little list, but Charlie Hartman, you're here, okay. And alternate Steve Malone. Alternate Michael Stunzio. And alternate Jane Johnson is here. Okay. And we have a full board, so I don't need to see anyone for any members, so. Tonight, on our agenda, is we have approval of the minutes of December 18th, 2024. Under public hearings, we have a warrant article public hearing for Article 2, Amendment 1, and Amendment 8 through 12. A petition zoning amendment, the rezoning of Base Hill Road, and under discussion of another business, we have a voluntary merger. Edward and Michele Mack have requested a voluntary merger between tax map 225 lot 54 and tax map 225 lot 55, and any other business that may come before the board. Moving to the top, nothing here that I see regarding the regional impact. I don't think we need the motion tonight. It was already in here pretty much. So we'll move to the minutes of December 19th, 2024. Is there a motion to approve those minutes? Second by, I think, Richard. Okay, Richard. Second by Brandon. So is there any further discussion on changes or modifications, anything to that? Then all those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. All opposed?
I abstain.
Abstain, okay. And moving to public hearings. These are public hearings on the warrant articles. The first one is a one article public hearing. It's Article 2, Amendment 1 and 8 through 12. What we're going to be doing tonight, the planning board has been discussing these articles for several meetings now, and refined it down to what we have now. And it was voted by consensus to have a public hearing on it on the 9th, which is what we're doing here. So this is what we're looking at, talking about, voting on, and there'll be very little change unless there is grammatical errors in there. Probably a little change because it's the public hearing. We're taking public input on the amendments and any questions. And the other one was the petition zoning amendment, and that again has been before the board, and the board voted to have it on this public hearing, but that was put under petition. So it means that even less can be changed on that one, maybe grammatical, but that's about it. And regardless of what the board votes, it's going on to the warrant because of the petition. So that's the difference between those two. So bring us to the first one. I'll open up the public hearing on warrant article, public hearing, Article 2, and we'll go to the first one. Amendment number 1. And that has to do with amending definitions. So I'll just read through it. Amending section 13 by adding, amending, or removing the following definitions. And we are striking out corporate office, replacing it with just business offices, and the definition would be buildings or buildings used primarily for conducting the affairs of a business, industry, or government, which may include ancillary services for office workers. And then for service establishment, we are giving a definition of provides a skilled service, personal labor, or expertise as opposed to providing a product or tangible commodity. And the third definition, retail establishment, sales in small quantities and or direct to the consumer. And we're removing the definition for profession. And that is amendment number 1. So anybody on the board want to speak in favor of that amendment?
I'll just make one comment just for the people here. What we're trying to do is come up with consistent definitions and simplify the ordinances. So that's what you're going to see throughout many of these.
Yeah, pretty much that's what we're doing. We're just consolidating the definitions of business offices, service establishments, and retail establishments. Pretty much is what we're doing. And any questions from the public and the people behind you too? Any questions from the public about that? Any further discussion on the board? So then a motion would be in order.
I'll see you there. We move it to the warrant.
Okay, a motion by Michael York and seconded by Mark Scalera to move it to the warrant article. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Okay. Now we're jumping to amendment number 8, which has to do with the, zoning, the, conservation commission, wetland, conservation commission district. So I'll read the articles one by one as we go down through here, and we'll do the same thing. We'll take a vote recommending that it be on the ballot or that it is not on the ballot. Well, that's how we'll do it. So for the first amendment, number 8, it reads like this: amend section 7, article B 1 to read as follows. The Swanzey Wetlands Conservation District is defined as those areas of the town consisting of wetlands and any uplands, non-wetlands within 75 feet of any wetlands. For purposes of section 7, wetlands means an area that is inundated or saturated by surface water or groundwater at a frequency and duration sufficient to support, and that under normal conditions does support, a prevalence of vegetation typically adapted for life in the saturated soil conditions, or as otherwise defined by RSA 482-A:2, and as it may be amended. If a site's vegetation has been cleared, the presence of hydric soil, as determined by a professional soil scientist, shall be evidence of a wetland. The Wetlands Conservation District is sometimes referred to herein as, and we're crossing out wetlands or wetland areas and adding in the WCD. That's amendment number 8. Anybody on the board wish to talk in favor of that?
I'm a little confused because we have a representative in the Conservation Commission who's prepared to give us more information on all of this. And wondering if we're going to obtain that information.
Yeah, we can entertain the information. I see you've got it all set up there. Normally, we've done that. We've had several meetings on it and entertain all the information. But if Jerry would like to give a presentation on what this amendment talked about.
I would,
Feel
thank
free.
you. Appreciate that. Thanks for having me. I'm grateful to everybody for coming out to hear more about this. I wanted to make sure we answer everybody's questions about it and, hear from everybody who has concerns about it as well. So go ahead and put it on. Thank you. This one's a little small. A couple of these are a little small. I apologize because there's quite a bit of, wordage on there, but this is the original purpose of the current wetland conservation district, which is on there right now. So I'll hear some people better. So there it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 purposes: to prevent the development of structures and land uses on wetlands which would contribute to the pollution of surface and groundwater, to prevent the destruction of natural wetlands which provide flood protection, groundwater recharge, pollution abatement, the augmentation of stream flow during dry periods, and valuable wildlife habitats. Letter C, to prevent unnecessary or excessive expenses to the town to provide and maintain essential services and utilities. Letter D, to encourage those uses that can be appropriately and safely located in wetland areas. And letter E, to preserve and enhance those aesthetic values associated with the wetlands of the town. Go to the next slide. So our current wetland conservation district does 3 things. It limits permitted activities in the wetlands. It provides a 125-foot setback for septic systems. And it says that wetland areas will not be used to satisfy minimum lot area and setback requirements. So why is the Conservation Commission proposing to amend the Wetland Conservation District? It's because we learned that our wetland overlay district is not fulfilling its stated purpose of actually protecting the wetlands themselves. Slide. So a little bit of background: in 2003, the planning board came to us and asked us, can we revert from that 125-foot septic setback to a 75-foot septic setback? And we decided, well, we need more information on that. Our open space plan was quite old. We did have a natural resource inventory done, but it didn't really look in depth at the wetlands in town. So we hired Moosewood Ecological back in 2023 to do 2 things. And one was to review our natural resource ordinances and regulations. That was to see if they were in line with our master plan and if they were doing what we intended for them to do, if they were fulfilling their purposes. And number 2 is to conduct a townwide wetlands evaluation. So that we hope that would tell us more about what kinds of wetlands we had in town, what sorts of services those wetlands were providing for us, and what sorts of values that they were providing for the town. Two things to note, this was paid for by our own funding and not part of the town budget. And the information that we've gathered is gonna become part of a new open space plan that we hope to finish in the coming year. And that hasn't been updated since 2004, so it's time. Next slide. So just a few things we learned on Swanzey's wetlands evaluation. We have 374 wetlands in Swansea. Swansea's a pretty wet place, but we're very lucky. We have an abundance of fresh, clean water here in Swansea. Wetlands include wooded wetlands, marshes, swamps, peatlands, bogs, beaver ponds, lake shores, and vernal pools. Wetlands cover about 2,824 acres in Swansea. They range from really small to about 371 acres in size. And then for the comparative wetland evaluation, they chose to look at wetlands at least 2 acres in size. So that meant that they looked at 117 wetlands covering about 2,500 acres, and the average size was 22 acres. So the wetland evaluation itself used the method for inventorying and evaluating freshwater wetlands in New Hampshire. And using this method, they did GIS work, field work. Biologists identified various wetland, functions of wetlands and assigned values to each of those functions. So if you go to the Conservation Commission page on the town website, you can see the summary of this wetland evaluation, and you can look at all the different maps they came up with that show us what's the top 10% of wetlands for flood control, for example, in Swansea, the top 10% most important wetlands for flood control. What's the top 10% most important wetlands for wildlife habitat? So they looked at, and I'll show you in the next slide, they looked at a variety of functions and values that way. So these are the functions and values they looked at. They looked at ecological integrity. Is that wetland basically intact? Does it have all its values intact? Fish and wildlife habitat, flood storage, groundwater recharge, sediment and nutrient trapping and retention, shoreline anchoring, recreation and education potential, scenic quality, and also noteworthiness. So do we have any particular wetlands that are sort of like statewide significance perhaps? So that was the wetlands evaluation. Then we had them review our land use planning documents. So they had a number of recommendations in the in the land use planning documents, and a lot of them centered around wetlands. That was a place where we were a little bit weak. So protecting our aquifer, our wetlands, and our floodplains is kind of an issue for us because we're very rich in fresh water. We want to make sure we're protecting those things. So 2 of their particular recommendations were things that we felt like we could try to act on pretty quickly. And one was to reconsider allowed uses within the wetlands district, which is what these amendments do. And the other is to consider establishing an upland buffer ordinance, which is also part of these amendments. Next slide. So the bottom line that Moosewood told us was that the functions of many of our wetlands in town have been compromised because we are lacking a naturally vegetated buffer along a lot of these wetlands. Not all of them, not most of them, but there's certainly some that have been compromised. Because our wetland overlay district allows the alteration and the destruction of that buffer and has no development setback except for septic systems, it's not really fulfilling its stated purposes of protecting our wetlands. So why is an upland buffer important? Well, a healthy, intact wetland requires some protection around it. And this is just a piece of land in town where, several pieces of land in town where there really is no buffer between the wetland and what's going on upland. The next slide. So wetland buffers do a number of things. They can catch and filter runoff, taking out trash, taking out sediment, phosphorus, and other pollutants before it gets to the brook or the marsh or whatever wetland we're talking about. It can absorb rainfall and snow melt and slow floodwaters. And if you remember the flood that we had a year and a half ago, I watched our wetland expand hugely upstream from our house to absorb those floodwaters. Buffers can protect critical habitat and corridors for wildlife and screen wildlife from human activity. So if you've got a development with bright lights and lots of people and things going on, you want to have that buffer to protect that wetland back there from all that activity. About a third of New Hampshire's native wildlife depends on aquatic and wetland habitat. That number jumped out at me as being pretty important. But buffers can also shade streams. If you like fish, you know that fish need shade to keep the water nice and cool and provide woody debris for their habitat. And buffers can also help hold banks in place when you do have those floods underwater. What's a big enough buffer? That depends on what you're trying to protect. 75 feet is not really enough of a buffer for something like a wood turtle. But it would protect fish eggs, for instance, from heated parking lot runoff. And this is just that was a graphic from buffer options for the bay, which is on Great Bay, and it's looking at some different buffer sizes and what it would help to protect. And it goes up to 330 feet for some terrestrial wildlife. So I'll just go over what the amendments would change. The Wetland Conservation District would include a naturally vegetated upland buffer and setback of 75 feet. The district would cover marshes, swamps, bogs, vernal pools, and wooded bottomlands or forested wetlands. Any surface waters, including rivers, streams, and intermittent streams, and the land under said waters. It would leave out fourth order streams and ponds like Swanzey Lake and Wilson Pond, because that's covered under a separate ordinance right now. And someday it'd be nice to see all those, including floodplains, under the same ordinance. It would simplify things, but right now that's not the way our ordinances are. I would also expand language on what's allowed and not allowed, and they'll be reading that language, but I'll go over that a little bit as well. Another thing it would do is reduce the 125-foot septic setback to a 75-foot septic setback, which is the state setback. It would allow for wetlands excluding open water to satisfy minimum lot and setback requirements in certain conditions. And that it would exempt areas which are currently included. So things like man-made ditches, drainage swales, farm ponds, and fire ponds are currently included under the wetlands district, and we would exempt those because they're man-made areas. So what would be allowed in the Wetlands Conservation District? Wells and man-made ponds, wildlife habitat development and management, conservation areas and footpaths, footbridges and boardwalks, forest management and tree farming within 75 feet, as long as it's consistent with best management practices. Agriculture within 75 feet, consistent with best management practices. And maintaining, repairing, and replacing existing structures, utilities, roads, things like that that are already there. This is just some for instances. So under the wetlands amendments we're proposing, you could do things like build a farm pond, build a gazebo, a garden shed, a duck line, plant a pollinator meadow, a rain garden, blueberries, Christmas trees. You could build brush piles, put up birdhouses. You could go in and brush hog to remove trees or invasives from the wetland buffer. And you could also go in and remove trees or practice agriculture as long as you're using best management practices. So these are some things that are not allowed under our proposed amendments. A leach field or a septic tank within 75 feet. A structure or a building greater than 100 square feet within 75 feet. All of these are within 75 feet. So that's the Wetland Conservation District. So parking lots, underground storage tanks, soil removal, excavation, and changing the drainage of the wetland in any way. Dumping, fill, or junk, storing construction equipment, vehicles, or anything hazardous. Or maintaining a regularly mowed and sprayed lawn to the edge of the wetland. So here's what's exempt. You mentioned this: man-made ditches and stormwater swales, farm and fire ponds, things that people created and are maintaining. Existing development, this is key. Nobody's gonna come tell you how to mow your lawn. I've been hearing that. We're talking about new developments. So the new amendments, like any new ordinance, would apply to new developments. It's really aimed mostly at commercial developments, but also if you had a new subdivision going in or something like that, we would ask that people did not create lawns that go straight down to the wetlands. And then also, as I mentioned before, properties on Swanzey Lake, Wilson Pond, And then fourth order streams like the Oswego are already covered under the shoreland protection zone. Next slide. Okay, so this is just kind of a reiteration. Who is affected by the new wetlands amendments? People proposing new projects within 75 feet of swamps, marshes, bogs, vernal pools, wooded wetlands, rivers, and streams, unless the project is exempted. And who is not affected is people with existing projects, homes or lawns, etc., within 75 feet of wetlands, or people on the Oswego River, South Branch, Swanzey Lake, Wilson Pond, fourth order rivers. Do neighboring towns have setbacks? Yes, it varies quite a bit, but many of them do. This is just a list of a lot of the towns around us that do have setbacks of anywhere from usually 50 to 100 feet of various kinds. Every ordinance is a little bit different. Richmond, Troy, Fitzwilliam, Marlborough, Dublin, Keene, Peterborough, Jaffrey, Westmoreland, Harrisville, Sullivan are just some of the towns that I looked at. What if I have to violate the ordinance? Obviously, there are times you need to cross a wetland, you need to put a new driveway in, something like that. With any ordinance, you can apply to the zoning board. In this case, it would be a variance. So people have asked me, how do I know if I have a wetland? Well, if you have a marsh, swamp, bog, stream, wooded wetland, or known vernal pool, you have a wetland. If you have an area that is saturated by surface or groundwater that normally supports wetland plants, you have a wetland. You can also go look at Swanzey's GIS map, and these maps are pretty cool. There's new maps on the town website. This is the, back up one now. There's new maps that, and I'll show you in another slide, but all you have to do is, if you type in, you Google Swanzey, New Hampshire GIS, you'll go right to the link. You can look up your own property. You can look at the property boundaries. You can look at where the rivers, where the wetlands are, who your neighbors are, all that jazz. There's different layers you can turn on and off. It's pretty fun to play with. So if you need to determine an exact boundary, that's where we would, if you have a development you're proposing, we'd bring in a wetland scientist to check out your situation, and they are able to tell using hydric soils and wetland plants and things like that. Okay, next slide. So this is just showing you what the Swanzey GIS looks like, and there's this is all sort of wetlands down in here, these little green grass marks. There. Shows you where the wetlands are. And maybe, do you know what this line is?
Which one, the yellow one?
The blue one right here.
That should be.
I'm just curious.
Which one?
This line, that's sort of
Usually
straight,
indicates a stream or a river.
because this is the stream that's all squiggly. I wondered if that was the wetland boundary or something.
Possibly.
Because it's not on both sides. I'm still figuring it out, but it's pretty fun to play with. All right, next slide. And then another question that I've had is, how do wetlands affect my taxes? And actually, what I said at the last planning board meeting turned out not to be right. I kept getting more and more and more information as I kept digging deeper and deeper and deeper. So this is actually, I went back to the assessing company and said, tell me if this is right. And we looked in the book, and indeed he said, yes, this is right. Wetland acreage is currently taxed at a lower rate, from 20 to 60% lower to begin with, and that's on a case-by-case basis. So if you don't like how yours is taxed, you can go talk about it. Unimproved wetland tracts of any size are also eligible for current use. If you want to put your land in current use, normally you need at least 10 acres of unimproved land to go into current use, but with wetlands, you don't have to have 10 acres.
What do you have to have? Is there a maximum?
It doesn't say there's a maximum, it just says any size.
So there's no minimum either?
That doesn't say there's a minimum, yeah. And then, if we do approve a buffer, I would like to say if and when we do approve some sort of a buffer, the state current use criteria allows for a wetland buffer of up to 100 feet to also be put into current use. So if we said there's a 75-foot buffer that you can't develop, you can put that 75-foot buffer also into current use on your property and pay $24 an acre on it. Yeah.
Sir, do you know if that's provided, it's not developed in any way? I would think so, but,
Well, I mean, wetlands shouldn't be developed to begin with.
but there are
I
some
don't know.
stuff that will be grandfathered in because there are.
So that's kind of, I guess that's up to the assessor, I don't know. I don't know what the answer, that's a good question.
They can't be developed.
And the building.
Well, it can't be developed further, but
There could be nothing unexpected.
you might have a 75-foot buffer and 100-square-foot shed on it. Does that
It
mean,
could be encouraged use of a shed.
Yeah, I think that's probably good. Alright, well, I think that's all the slides that I had. And if the chair would allow, I'm happy to entertain questions or whatever.
Yep, that's an overview of the amendments 8 through 12, pretty much an overview of all of them we'll be going over. We're on amendment 8, but yeah, any questions you have now, I'll express in your mind for Sherry. Anybody? So, any questions from the board? Sure. Matt?
Thank you, appreciate the opportunity to talk about it.
John, you had something to talk about as well?
Yeah, I'd like, John Noonan with Fieldstone Land Consultants, I'd like to just.
Three would? Did you say? I didn't.
Fieldstone Land Consultant, John Noonan. Civil engineer with Fieldstone.
And you're here to address those as to what?
So I want to just discuss the wetlands setback and some of the things that were discussed. So I'm gonna bring a set of lines up there.
Yeah, you can set that right over there or leaning at the screen if you want.
Yeah. Hard to see what the projection on. Roads and the like,
Yeah, we're good.
Well, as the board is aware, we've worked with multiple clients here in town on mostly commercial industrial sites, some residential and mixed uses in town. And we just want to bring up and make it clear, on some of these items of projects that have already been approved, some that have been built, or some that we're currently working on, and just brings a light on some of the unintended, maybe unintentional consequences that would come from the 30-foot setback. So this here is a plan where we worked on, this is an approved project that is under construction currently on Safford Drive. So Safford Drive goes here. Carlisle Forest is down on this end, Nanotech. And what's highlighted here in yellow is what would be the buffer. And, pretty substantial impact. I mean, the project that was already approved, I know, it was discussed that existing and pre-approved ones would not be impacted, but just to point out the impacts of the 75-foot impact, buffer here. This project would almost be non-buildable at this point. This project wouldn't exist. We'd be able to put maybe 2 of those units of those contractor bays that are under construction on that site. The remainder of this entire side down Safford Drive almost becomes unbuildable because there's no, as it currently is written in the amendment, there's no crossing for driveway access allowed, parking is excluded. So all this yellow is now taken from areas that were currently, right now before the amendment, would be allowed to be built on. Safford Drive was, 15 plus years ago, the town spent a lot of money as a TIF district to expand and improve the road, build roads with water and sewer. In the intent of having a corporate park area here, and that was how Nanotech was constructed. Carlisle Ford was part of that, and then now we're suddenly the last 3 years we're seeing a lot of development coming in where we're utilizing that district and those resources that the town put in for water and sewer. As the amendment goes forward, it would severely limit that district on Safford Drive. A lot of the areas that are currently could be built on would have a difficult time being constructed. This is another site in town that they're working on. So Paul Thomas is here. He owns this property. For 30 years he's paid taxes on the property, and we've done concepts and talked to him about different development ideas. And just under 2 years ago, we did a concept here for him to expand and develop more on his land. The areas in yellow again then show what what land would be taken out and couldn't be used, so. Substantially cuts back on what he could actually use that his property for. This end down here is where they sell the sheds. It was formerly the landscape yard. A small area like that would now be unusable with a 75-foot setback. And these aren't every commercial lot in town. They're trying to show some examples of how the impact of a 75-foot buffer would impact things in town. Here's another concept that we had done, and this entire area here. Yeah, so this is actually the town firehouse that we're working on. We've done some concepts on this, and you know, as everyone knows, the firehouse has moved on different lots, looking for different locations. Different concepts come up. This seriously impacts the current one of what we're looking at the lot. So pretty substantial. And you know, I just want to point out that the towns listed, you know, I understand that there's a concern about having a buffer, and that a lot of towns around the area have a buffer. Swanzey doesn't have it. And we're not saying, you know, as consultants on my end, we're not saying that a buffer you should not, you know, consider a buffer. But consider the impacts and how it's done into balance between development and protecting the resource. As it's written right now, there's a lot of items in there that kind of cut back and hinder development. You know, there was discussion now that there is a grandfather clause, so if you've already constructed, then that's okay. But residential property, so anyone who's landowner in town, you're gonna be impacted by this. You wanna, you know, put a shed, put a pool up, put a deck on your house, and there's a lot of properties that are right in your wetlands. You're now going to the zoning board for approval. So, you know, I would just look at, could it be a special exception? Could it be a conditional use permit? The town adopts a conditional use permit process that would go through the planning board, and you as a planning board then can work with a consultant or the landowner directly. And the Conservation Commission is brought in as part of that process. So Keene has a process like this, conditional use permit. It allows us as consultants to meet with the planning board, bring a concept and say, this part is a high value functioning wetland. This portion is not. How about we pull this development portion to one side of the property or not? Or you know, these areas that are industrial. Work with the Conservation Commission and the planning board to come up with a back and forth and come up with a design that balances between protecting the resource and still getting the value of the landowner for development of their own property. So I would ask that, you know, as the board considers their vote is, you know, going forward and having some provisions in if they adopt a weapon ordinance to have some provisions to allow people to you know, come back and forth and not go through a variance, because the variance is very black and white, and it's a yes, no, right? So you go to zoning board, you don't meet the 5 criteria, and you have just at that time a concept of what you want to build at your home, or you want to build as a commercial development. It's yes and no, and it's voted down, then you can't come back to the same concept. You have to change it dramatically. Whereas if it's a conditional use, we can bring it to the board, and the Conservation Commission has concerns, or the board has concerns, we can revise it and go back and forth, and you end up with a win-win between the landowner and what the town board is like. So these are basic examples. I just wanted to come here tonight and kind of discuss what the implications are of this amendment for 75 foot buffer.
Yeah, appreciate the information. How much of that TIF district up there, Sapper Drive, would you say is affected? You've shown us a couple of lots.
So substantial amount, I would say at least 60% of that. I would say TIF district. Yeah.
Is there another picture of the other side of the road? I think the was half mine.
This is the other side here, so the portion I just showed was on this side of Safford Drive, is where it hooks up. Fairgrounds is right here. Yeah, substantial amount on this side too, so I would say you're, you know, probably 60% of your land along Safford Drive in that TIF district is probably taken out of developing land.
I have a question about, I've heard at one point that whole area is in a borrow, with the exception of the lake, the little pond that's there. Stafford Drive, was a borrow, I think it was an area that's excavated for sand gravel. Is that not true?
Initially, it was the pasture, Page's farm, Derek's farm. And when they closed down, I believe they sold or leased the land, I think, to Whitcomb. And they went up there and tried to excavate, put out a lot of there. And they went down, I would say probably 8 or 10 feet. And all of a sudden, their whole area filled in with water. So, and there was not only the one section where you're showing now, where Flatley is, but on the north side of that road, they did 3 other pits through there, and they all had the same problem. So yes, there is a wet area, but what you're showing there now, Flatley is already developed. And that project has been approved, so there's not gonna be a change into that area.
Yes, so this is not what, this is not what Flatley is. So this is where it turns right here, the fairgrounds is right here. This was the gridiron project that was approved here, not constructed yet, so this was approved by the planning board last year. But this is really to show all the land that ends up coming out of that TIF district. Flatley, really the project that you're discussing, so where this comes down, comes past Carlisle, it's this building right here. Nanotech is would be down here, and Flatley would be up in this area. That Flatley project would be another one that, it's approved and it's built, but that one with a 75-foot wouldn't even be able to be constructed.
I guess where I'm going with this question is, it was my impression that this was heavily disturbed land before we undertook the TIF development. And I'm wondering whether if the wetlands that exist today, are man-made, basically, because it's been so disturbed. I just don't know, it's a question.
May or may not be, and they, don't know, I guess they'd have to be proven by a soil scientist.
So, and it's sort of this, like, puts that area of town in the category. Conventional development.
It could if there was further in the ordinance, but the ordinance is gonna say what it says, and that's it. That's what it's gonna go by, and there's a lot of money the town has invested up there, in the infrastructure of the road, the water up there, and the sewer up there, and that's a bit of a loss for the town. Any other questions?
So you mentioned that Keene has a process, for conditional use that involves the conservation committee. Can you expand on that a little bit more, and maybe just kind of set the question up here? Currently we see projects before they come in front of this board. I'm on the conservation committee too, so I'm sorry, I'm here for the planning board. The conservation committee sees projects and they make recommendations to the planning board, and those recommendations are considered sometimes more, sometimes less, right? You take the wetlands, to me, it gets more serious, right? So with that in mind, can you elaborate a little bit more on the Keene process? I mean, are they actually looking for approval from the conservation committee?
Just keep it brief, because we're in a zoning discussion tonight, so
So what we would do is, in Keene, you end up submitting your site plan application, just like you do in Swanzey. The planner then looks at it and says, okay, you're gonna be impacting your driveway crosses a wetland buffer. So they have 2 buffers. The rural and ag areas are 75 feet from the wetland resource. The downtown districts are 30 feet away. Regardless if you cross the buffer on either one or impacted, the planning board, before they see it, you turn in your application, they send it to the Conservation Commission. We, as the applicant and consultant, meet with the Conservation Commission in a meeting, and we also do a site walk. They then recommend it to the planning board to move forward. And then, of course, state permits come after that. We would then go to the planning board, and the planning board votes on the conditional use permit. They might deny the conditional use permit or say, can you not impact this piece and move your driveway over here, whatever that might be. And then if there's a back and forth. So like I was saying, with a variance, it's a yes or no. And if it's denied, you have to completely change your plan. You can't come back to the same plan that you move your driveway 10 feet.
question.
On a question and a comment, the question is, you showed the fire station proposal there, and, I looked at that plot and your drawing of it. And I thought the, southern edge of the building was about 72 feet from the wetland. How far do you say it is?
From the edge of.
From the edge of the wetland area, not where you're.
Oh, from the edge of the, yes.
Of the wetland area, because you're putting some drainage in there, which is a man-made structure, which is not,
Plus all the parking, so there's the end.
there's no parking down there.
Yeah, there's parking down
No,
there.
there isn't, not down there, not down the bottom. There's some parking in there,
But
but
the
not.
proposed parking right here is within the buffer.
Yeah, that's within the 75 feet,
Yes, sir.
okay, so.
The building's not.
I know, it was very hard for me to measure from the parking area to where the wetland actually is, on that diagram, and so.
Okay, yeah.
So can you show me where the wetland begins?
I don't have the full site plans tonight, but this,
That's the only one I don't know.
We're getting off topic.
Right.
We've already done.
this is like down on the edge of the page. So this yellow here, this is the extent of the 75 feet. That's what we're showing. This yellow all right here is the 75.
Yeah, okay, I have to agree with you in that sense, I'm just surprised because I thought I had done some calculations myself. And, so I'm just, but my comment is that, as a member of the Conservation Commission, I really want to protect the wetlands in this town. And I've been looking for a way to find a compromise between wanting to protect the wetlands and also allowing reasonable development of the town. And one of the examples has always been that Flatley project where we've allowed some crossings of the wetland area with driveways, et cetera, and it seemed to fit and it seemed to be engineered in such a way that the wetland was preserved. So I'm intrigued by this process that you're describing of a conditional use permit. But I want to make sure that the people who are interested in the conservation of the wetlands and preservation of all the things that they do that Sherry outlined before are indeed considered. And so I'm not certain yet where that goes. And lastly, I'll say I'm on the zoning board and I agree with you, but variance is very hard to get, and if it happens, there's no room for wiggle, and if you apply your project there and it's denied, then you can't come back with the same project. So I hear you there. I think this is a very difficult decision for the town and for the planning board, and I respect your gentlemen and ladies' consideration.
Just identify yourself. please.
Vicky Scalera.
Thank you.
I guess I'm wondering, because I'm naive about this. So Sherry's talking about a 75-foot buffer, but you, as the, whatever exactly your role is, how far from the wetlands would you personally recommend development? Like, you wouldn't go to the edge of wetland, like I wetlands on my land, and I know I wouldn't build. I don't know if it's 75 feet, but I know it's not 10 feet. So what is your
Yeah,
recommendation?
so I'm not here to recommend a buffer.
Well, what, you're saying 75 is too far, so what is not too far in your opinion?
No, what I'm trying to point out is the extent of a 75-foot buffer, and the written amendment right now for the zoning
All right, but there
doesn't allow
must
you
be
to do
some.
anything in that buffer,
Okay.
correct? So if you want to put a swimming pool behind your house, you have to go to the zoning board. If they deny it, you can never put a pool behind your house because you might be 75 feet within the wetland. Those are the type of implications I'm trying to bring forward, and some of the concerns even with the commercial development in town. I'm not just saying it should be 30 feet, it should be 10 feet. You know, that's not my stance to say what the buffer should be, or if there should or should not be a buffer. I'm just trying to point out, as it's written right now, what the implications of the written amendment are. and the impacts that it could have.
I guess, but I'm just saying that maybe the implication isn't 75 feet or the whole space that you showed.
Let's just
because-
see if the 75-foot passes or not, and then that
I
discussion
I'm
can
just
say.
couldn't understand, that's all.
Yeah.
That's.
Any more questions, the engineer?
I don't have a question of the engineer, but I would like to make a comment to the board. My name's Sarah Carbonell. I'm a Winchester resident. I am the partner of Mike Faulkner, who is a Swanzey businessman. He is also the owner of 4 properties in town. I was also the Swansea planner for 20 years, and prior to that, I have 15 years' experience working with law firms, doing applications before planning boards, zoning boards, drafting ordinances for communities. When I looked at this proposed regulation, and I know there's a lot of work that's gone into it, but when you're proposing an ordinance, it needs to be a balancing test between the public good and the private rights. And hopefully those are 50-50. Sometimes the public good weighs out a little bit more at 60%, 60-40. In this case, it is basically a taking, or could be considered a taking of one's private property. If you had a dot on the table and you did a 75-foot radius around that, that takes up 0.55 acres, that dot with that buffer. So that's more than half an acre. I'm sorry, it's 0.41 acres to calculate the area there. So just that one dot takes up almost half an acre of buffer. If you have a table, you're sitting at a 3x8 table, and that's a wetland. You do a 75-foot buffer around that. That is a 0.55 acre impact. You have a 1 acre minimum lot size. You have now taken more than half that lot because you have a 3x8 wetland on your property. That is pretty onerous. It might be justified, but in this particular case, there's no relief. There's no special exception provisions. There's no conditional use permit. You have a vernal pool, a little vernal pool on your property that you don't even know it's there in the fall, but shows up in the spring. And it's within the, you have to do a 75-foot buffer around that. You can't put your garage there. You can't put your swimming pool there. If you don't have any other place, you need to come for a variance. So in my estimation, I think the intention is good. I think as Chad Brandon and John have said tonight, there are many unintended consequences of this ordinance as written. And I think it needs a lot more work.
Thank you for your comments. Anybody else?
I've got a question, I guess, to follow on what Sarah's saying, because we know that, and I have to talk to a professional, so sorry. We know that there are buffers in surrounding communities. Do all of those surrounding communities that use wetlands buffers also have some version of a conditional use permit?
Not necessarily conditional use permit, so it might still be under the zoning board, but have a special exception.
Okay, so
And the
there's
special exception will have provisions saying these are permitted uses, these are prohibited uses. Such a gas station within 75 feet is not allowed, or underground fuel storage, or that might be prohibited. And permitted uses might be an ADU on a house that have a garage with a accessory dwelling unit above it, or that might be a permitted use, or a driveway crossing for any lot is a permitted use to cross the buffer.
Okay, so that removes us from Sarah's point of concern, which is she's feeling that it's taking because no use is permitted within the 75-foot as this.
Currently, as it's amended,
Yeah,
there's.
but in the other towns where we do have 75-foot, that there are specific uses that are permitted.
Just about every town has some type of provision in there to allow certain things, and whether that falls under the zoning board and is a special exception, or it falls under the planning board as a conditional use where you have the conservation commission and the planning board reviewing the project.
Okay,
So it could go either.
okay. Thank you.
Anybody else? Farmer.
Barbara Scully. So my question is there any way that at this meeting, we could correct that problem of special exception or conditional use and still move the article forward?
If it were just one thing that we could correct, perhaps, but there's a lot of things that's gonna need correction, and there's gonna need more discussion, in my opinion, anyway, with the board. What were you gonna say?
I have some background on that.
Yeah.
That was going to be in the amendment. Special exception didn't really make sense for the amendments, but a conditional use did.
Yeah.
However, Swanzey does not currently have a process for conditional use permits yet.
So we can do that tonight.
We can't do that tonight. When we adopt a conditional use permit provision in our ordinance, then we can. And that can be done at the same time, but we don't currently have a process. Not to say we won't ever have a process. Right now, we don't.
So I guess my other comment is just that we need to think about what the focus and the purpose is of this ordinance. And, you know, we're trying to, you know, how much we value the wetlands and the values that they hold. So this balance that Sarah speaks about between public use and private use, I think that's what we have to be thinking about is the public interest in this case. Some of these lands, we knew many years ago when that industrial zone was created, that it was wet and people have been having problems trying to develop it because it was so wet. So that's like not new.
The setback is what's new, I mean,
Right. But what I'm saying is that if we have marginal land, you know, so do we push it? Or do we try to protect the resource and maybe rethink about where we're building in order to protect the resource that ultimately protects the water quality and the interests of the town, so.
okay. You're Richard.
Just to, an opinion, I guess. We have learned over time that it's not smart to put oil on top of a stagnant pond to get rid of mosquitoes. This is something we did in the 50s. We found that through time, that it's really damaged the system around, this is just around Wilson Pond. But what my point is that over time, we have learned that what we thought we were doing correctly isn't correct. And what I would like to see is us become a little more proactive since we've learned how to protect the wetland and what is needed to be, as I say, proactive to take care of the wetland. And if we've made a mistake, we can go back and shrink the buffer. But it's a heck of a hard job to undo something if we close it down to the 30 feet or the 20 feet or whatever. You know, somebody would suggest. I wouldn't. Where the state has stated or expressed concerns about being closer than 75 feet.
That's septic, we're talking
Well,
about.
no, but they want, I read in another area that they have, maybe the University of Hampshire or whatever. But they have suggested strongly that we have a buffer of, you know, of at least 75 feet to protect the wetlands. And I just,
Well, the state requires nothing, I mean, in the RSA, the state requires no buffer.
well,
You're
again, these are conservation deals, granted, the state is a little bit behind in a lot of areas, but I would really strongly suggest that we go with the 75-foot setback. And if we need to, through, you know, maybe more education, we can shrink it safely, we can do that next year. But I'd hate to see us, you know, push it and then find out that we're incorrect, you know, that we're correct, not correct in doing this.
Well, of all the wetlands in town that have been here for, you know, hundreds, thousands of years, I guess it is. Can you point to any of them that have been affected or are being affected by not having a 75-foot buffer? Yeah, I'm just asking.
Because we have somebody who can perhaps answer that.
Wetlands right in your backyard. Adjacent to your property, I mean, there was a pond where that was, a thriving peepers, wetland. And slowly it's been encroached upon, and slowly it's getting filled in, and slowly it's being destructed, you know.
There are
So,
still peepers there. I mean,
well, there are, but that pond is really reduced in its value, it's getting
You talking
filled
about the fire
in.
pond over here?
Well,
that fire pond that goes with the, what is Portal Lake?
Well, it's more than the fire pond because it's got a stream that comes through, almost the building, comes all the way down and goes into the river. Yeah,
Brought up.
but, yeah, I'm just saying that the impact and all the development is because it really impacted the quality of that pond. So, there's probably a number of places similar to that would have benefited if we had given it a little bit more protection.
Setback you're talking about there,
Yeah,
not
setback.
necessarily a buffer zone with nothing in it but setback. Okay, thank you.
May I say something, Scott?
Yeah.
I just want to kind of reiterate what Adam said, is that we did start at the beginning of this process. Trying to have language about special exceptions, because I agree with what you're saying and what Sarah said, that we want. To have there be some relief from this, we want there to be some sort of balance, so. Whether or not you vote for this tonight, we're gonna be back, we're gonna keep at it. Because, we don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good, but we also want to get this right. So, we're here to try to start this process, it isn't just the start and not the end. We'll keep at it. But, I think the information that given tonight, I would hope would be absorbed and used. Because, when we learn more, we try to do better.
Thank you.
Well, just one more thought, because I'd like to thank Barbara for all, I know that she and Deb Crowder worked for 25 years to try to help the town of Swanzey understand the value of our aquifers. And it's frustrating to have such good work in front of us that I think we're all in agreement that we want to protect our water. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But I'm wondering, Conservation Commission, are you comfortable? I want to respect all the work that you've done because I think it's really good work, but we're sharing.
Right here.
Okay. Would you be comfortable with us as a planning board saying, denying or not approving these amendments? And you continuing for another year's work? I wanted.
I agree, there's some weakness to it, and that was unavoidable. We decided to make a run at it, see how it went. So like I said, whether you voted up or down tonight, we're not giving up. We learned this information, it's important information, we need to do what we can to protect the wetlands, we're not going away. This information is not lost. And all the work we've done is not lost, we'll take what we've done and move forward with it.
And I've got one more question, and that's from the Adam. We don't have time at this point to make any kind of significant changes to this.
Don't believe so. We just checked the dates earlier today. No time this year.
Because in my dreamland, I would like us to find some sort of compromise that would address some of these issues, so that we could at least.
That was several meetings ago,
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that wasn't on the table apparently.
so if we don't have that option, then. We have to go with what we have.
What we have here, yeah.
There's no limit to how much we can discuss this next year, or sorry, this year. So we are too late to deal with Warrant for this year. If it's denied tonight and the Conservation Commission wants to keep working, there's no reason why we can't discuss it for after 55. There is certain timeframes for stuff that goes in the warrant article, but just talks that can go out there throughout the years. So.
I would, if I'm reading the room correctly, this may not pass. And if it doesn't pass, I would really urge the planning board to commit to looking very seriously at conditional use provisions and also at possible special exceptions as another way of going. But to continue working with the Conservation Commission on trying to find a solution, a compromise, so that we can do what we all want to do, and that is protect the resources of Swanzey and allow reasonable and responsible development. And that's what we want to do. So I'm just saying that as a statement, and I hope when you make the vote that you will also consider that as a resolution that you might all make together.
Full disclosure, I am working on a conditional use.
I understand you are, but I want the planning board to
Well,
go on record to be.
Yeah, exactly.
We've been working with the Conservation Commission on this. This isn't the first time we've seen the Conservation Commission on this or these regulations, so we've been working with them.
Want to continue, Scott.
Yeah,
So if it's shut down tonight, like all of you don't have any room this year, so all of these projects that are being done can go right ahead and take over the, whatever they want on the wetlands, right?
well, the projects you're referring to are the ones that have already been approved, I think,
Okay,
so they'd be going on regardless.
oh, okay,
So other projects will come before the board, planning board before anything happens, and public hearings will be held, and you're welcome to attend
okay.
and voice your opinion on it. You, this is-
I'm sorry, just so everybody's aware, any project that's approved prior to, our warrant article being voted on, those follow the code as it was in 2024. Anything, approved after the warrant article gets voted on uses that version of the code. So, I don't like to use the term grandfather necessarily, but if your project's approved before these get voted on, then they use 2024 code. Anything after is 2025.
And he's referring to is voted on tonight, not at public, I mean, not at the town meeting, tonight. If the board votes to approve these tonight, then anything coming before us after that is gonna go with the new rules, regardless of whether it's passed at town meeting. Then at town meeting, if it isn't passed, it goes to the old rules. That's usually where Sarah.
Sarah Carbonell again. People have been referring to projects and large projects, and I think they talk about commercial development and how this is going to impact that. It's going to impact Joe homeowner. It's not just for commercial development. It's for anyone who wants to construct anything or use anything on their property that has a wetlands on it. Or it might not even be the wetlands on your property. Your neighbor might have a wetlands that is right up to the property line. That would impact your property. So it's got, the way it's written right now has serious impacts, not just for commercial development, but for the homeowner who might have a 1 acre lot, wants to just build his garage, and the only place he can do it is in that 75-foot buffer. That's my point. It applies across the board if it's passed.
Okay, thank you. So let's get back to amendment number 8. Yes.
Scott, I kind of sketched up a thing. Oh, I'm sorry. Mike Faulkner. I am a septic designer, septic installer, contractor, excavating contractor. And I sketched up something that kind of goes with her. This is a 1 acre lot. Okay. Yeah. I can't hear. Oh. This is a 1 acre lot with Swanzey's current, minimum frontage of 150 feet. Okay. 290, the math comes out to 1 acre lot. If you take that 75-foot radius, you have one little bit of wetland right there in the middle of the lot. This is what's impacted. Okay, so that no access to the back. Unless you're bird watching. If that wetland happens to be right up close to the road. And you pull 150 foot radius, well, 75-foot radius, 150 feet of actual impact. You can't access the land, period. You're taking the property. You're changing the use. How do you tax somebody on this? If it's been a building lot for, however long. Now the town is saying, no, sorry, can't do anything on it. That's a problem.
Okay, thank you.
In my mind, that's a problem.
Those are legal checklist. I don't agree with that.
So we're getting back to amendment number 8, and we've heard public testimony on it, and there's no surprise that my position hasn't changed on that. It was taken from it, and The other thing is, it's not fair. I mentioned it when we first discussed it with the Conservation Commission, it's not a fair ordinance where one property owner has to give up a 75-foot, buffer zone. They can't do anything on it, and the next door neighbor, if it doesn't have it, doesn't have to give it up. It's not really fair, it's not across the board. It doesn't want to think, as you know, not been in favor of it, so. Yes,
I agree with Scott that it's a taking of property. And you're using in domain by taking in front of the voters.
taking property rights. I mean, you still have to pay
It's still-
taxes.
it's still-
If they take the property, nobody pays tax. They don't
Right,
pay
but it's
taxes.
still a taking of property. If you're telling us everything, you can't use it, and to my mind, giving them more, right, it's not just compensation. Which you have to have when you take property like that. And also, 12A of the Constitution in New Hampshire said, when you do that, you gotta have to take it for public use. Public use is defined as a school, a roadway, or a government building, like a fire department or a police department. This is the purpose. That law was changed in 2006, that amendment was put on, because of the London, Connecticut debacle. So I think there's some very serious legal problems that the town may incur. With some property owners when they can't use their property.
All right, thank you. So I think we're ready for a vote on this one.
Is now the time to read.
Letters, you gonna read those into the record? We do have correspondence from the selectmen. Okay, I will let Adam read correspondence from the selectmen and
Reading citizens. I'd say it's 2 emails in one. Oh, yeah. Thank you. I received some comments from people who couldn't be here tonight. It is my job to read these comments, so you all know. We're gonna start with a letter from Kimberly Miller. She says, dear Adam, I hope the Christmas finds you well. Thank you for taking the time to speak to me on the phone. I included in this email are my comments regarding the proposed wetland conservation program. I am writing to express my strong support for the continued and enhanced conservation of our wetlands within our town. As a concerned resident, I believe that protecting our local wetlands is crucial to preserving both the environmental health of our community and the quality of life for all of its residents. Wetlands provide invaluable benefit, including water filtration, flood control, and essential habitats for wildlife. They also contribute to the overall resilience of our town in the face of climate change, mitigating the impacts of rising waters and severe weather events, not to mention groundwater contamination risks such as MTBE incidents. Furthermore, wetlands play a key role in maintaining biodiversity and supporting the local economy through ecotourism and recreation. I urge you to advocate for these measures to better our wetland protection policies and conservation measures by safeguarding these vital ecosystems. We ensure the long-term sustainability of our town's natural resources. Thank you for your time. Confident that town leadership, we can continue to foster a healthy, sustainable community for future generations. Sincerely, Ms. Miller. That was Kimberly Miller. Oh, you all, oh, she does, sorry, yeah. Apologies for another email, I understand, that's perfect, right? I understand that you value property rights, it is an important part of freedom, but if we don't protect wetlands, it could harm the broader community, and eventually it could even affect the value and living of your own property and other aspects of our rights. Remember, wetlands aren't just beautiful ecosystems, they act as a natural flood barrier, filtering water, preventing erosion. These services help protect property and save money in the long run. And if the concern is the ability to sell your land to developers, this might bring in quick cash. But if wetlands are destroyed and the area becomes more prone to flooding or erosion, that could significantly reduce property values in the future, not just for you, but for everybody nearby. The risk of increased costs for flood control or insurance could also make the land less desirable in the long run. Many investors are now looking for properties with natural features like wetlands because they already know how valuable they are for flood protection, water filtration, and wildlife habitats. Wetlands can increase the value of land in the long run, especially as sustainability becomes more important in the market. This could attract the types of businesses we want to see in Swanzey, not just another storage unit facility. I know you care about all your properties and want to make sure the best decision for it. Wetlands protection isn't about taking away your rights, it's about ensuring the whole community thrives. And that includes protecting all of our properties in the long run. Ms. Miller. The next letter we have here is from Mr. Connor Maroney. Dear Mr. Paquette, I am a citizen of Swanzey, New Hampshire, and I'm writing to express my support for proposing amendments 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 for the Wetlands Conservation District. Through this email, as I am unable to attend here tonight. It's come to my attention that there are local communities who believe the regulations brought forward by Mr. 12 are an infringement of property rights and want them to be voted down. While some take that into consideration, another idea worth noting is how voting down the amendments and allowing people to develop with no regards to the wetlands will affect other citizens in Swansea, people who live here full time. Among the practical uses for wetlands is their ability to offer protection from flooding due to its ability to absorb water. Where I grew up in my neighborhood, we saw development in the wooded area behind the house, which resulted in rainwater being diverted downhill into our backyard, which would seep into the house, causing constant water basement. Took years before being able to put a system in place that would divert the water from our home. This is an inconvenience I would not wish to see happen to anyone who owns property in town, and having those wetlands as a safeguard against it, especially given the amount of rain and damage that came to the town in 2023. Perhaps the most important factor in having these regulations in place also concerns the wetlands' ability to serve as nature's kidneys for the people who use groundwater in the area, as well as they help filter out pollutants and add minerals to water. Provide clean water for use around the house. Developing too close to wetlands on top of wetlands runs the risk of pollutants getting into the inhabitants' well water, which could harm the members or household over time. Something with people in the New England area should be familiar. The right for people to make the choice to have this water and have it be clean should not be infringed, especially for constructing buildings and businesses that are owned by people who do not live in Swansea. It is for these reasons that I support 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 for the Wetlands Conservation District. These regulations will help ensure that every citizen is Swansea and those who pass through will be able to enjoy the benefits of the wetlands that work so hard for us without fear of it being contaminated or just taken away. Thank you for your time. Really continuity. One more, promise, last one. This is from the Board of Selectmen. And let's see here. For the 2025 zoning ordinance amendments, dear Mr. Chairman and members of the planning board. The Swansea Board of Selectmen is taking the unusual step of authorizing to express the board's collective opinion regarding the proposed 2025 zoning ordinance amendments known as amendments 8 through 12, specific to the amendment of the current wetlands conservation district. I am addressing the planning board in the interest of the town as an agent of the selectmen and as part of their fiduciary responsibilities of the residents of Swansea. For the reasons outlined below, the selectmen are asking that these amendments not move forward to the warrant in 2025. The idea that these amendments should be put before the voters for them to decide is noble. However, these are complex changes that will likely be approved without an understanding of all of the impacts that they are recommended by the planning board. The selectmen are not asking you to reconsider your support for the concept of protecting wetlands and aquifers because they believe that the concept and the amendments are well intentioned. The selectmen are asking the planning board to not put these amendments before the voters in 2025 and instead to work collaboratively with the Conservation Commission, Planning Department, and Economic Development Advisory Committee, and experts like the engineers and wetland scientists at Gibson Land Consultants. This will allow time to consider the information learned over the last month, adding relief through conditional use permits and the unanticipated consequences. Come back in 2026 with amendments to be presented to the public that have had adequate exposure to achieve protection of wetlands while minimizing the intrusion on property rights by allowing for use. That is something that current selectmen would likely support. I do believe that there has been sufficient consideration of the unintended consequences resulting from the enforcement of these articles. There has not been information presented which includes the financial obligation incurred by the town to enforce these amendments. There has not been data provided that would indicate the anticipated reduction in property value due to the inability of landowners to use their land while maintaining a 75-foot undisturbed setback from wetlands on their property or adjacent properties. For example, at the January 8th, 2025 Board of Selectmen meeting, Fieldstone Land Consultants noted that the properties along Stafford Drive will no longer be developable. We looked at Stafford Drive already. I'm not going to read the paragraph because it's just reiterating what John said. The town created Stafford Drive Industrial Park with a tip overlay district almost 30 years ago. The intent was to encourage development of the property for commercial and industrial uses. The bond undertaken by the town will be paid off in 2027, and the TIF will be dissolved. The tax revenue, which has been used to pay off the bond, will then go to the town's general funds. However, the development contemplated when the district was created will not be able to occur. This is a financial taking from the residents of Swanzey, as the exception was to encourage commercial development and receive the tax revenue that the development created. The landowner will no longer have marketable property, which will be a measurable financial taking from the landowner. In addition, the land will then stay in current use, which will yield significantly lower taxes, which will constitute a taking from the town's perspective. Swanzey taxpayers in essence invested in this property. The proposed new regulations would deprive residents of their anticipated return. Another property, which will be presented by Fieldstone, shows a conceptual plan for a light use commercial development on Route 12 between AeroQuest and Marcy Hill. I don't know if you showed that one, John. Yeah, that's
mine.
This plan is approvable under the current regulations. However, the land will essentially be non-developable after the proposed amendments. In addition, the portion which borders Route 12 and Marcy Hill Road was recently purchased from the town. The purchased parcel has access on Marcy Hill Road, but the proposed amendments would eliminate that access and create an area which could not be disturbed. In essence, the owner purchased a body of wetland, which he would not have purchased if he would not be able to use it. The loss of light use commercial buildings will result in loss of property tax revenue to the town and render the property tax no value to the landowner. Again, a financial taking from the landowner and the town. Because wetlands are not clearly defined in the amendments, many property owners will lose the ability to mow their lawns, create an ADU, build a garage, garden, create a play area for their children, etc. The proposed amendments will create an unnecessary burden for the residential property owners and in essence halt significant commercial development in town. The selectmen do not believe that this is beneficial planning, nor this is the best interest for taxpayers. In summary, in the summary packet from the Conservation Commission, which was presented to the Board of Selectmen, one page listed several towns and setbacks that those towns require from wetlands. On the surface, the information may be correct, but the enforcement of the setbacks is not black and white. Many towns offer permitted uses within the wetland buffers by special exception and/or conditional use permit. With both, a landowner can apply for relief. In the case of a special exception, they would apply to zoning board. If they need a conditional use permit, they would apply to planning board. If the preset conditions are met, the landowner will be granted relief from the zoning board or planning board. In both cases, the planning board will have contemplated allowable uses and provided a path of relief for the landowner. Proposed amendments 8 through 12 do not provide relief. These amendments very specifically state that the 75-foot buffer will be a natural undisturbed buffer. Under these proposed regulations, the only relief available to a landowner is applying to the zoning board for a variance, which is and should be an extremely high burden to achieve. If the ordinance states an undisturbed 75-foot buffer is required, how does a landowner persuade the zoning board that any intrusion on that will be within the spirit of the ordinance? Normally, the hardship criteria is a high hurdle, and normally a variance request that fails because the applicant cannot prove a hardship. In this situation, it would be easier to prove a hardship than it would be to prove that the proposed use meets the spirit of the ordinance. Why are fourth order bodies of water like Wilton Pond, Swanzey Lake, Ashley Lit, and South Branch that are identified as primary wetlands exempt? Why should a landowner who owns property on one of these bodies of water be exempt, be allowed to mow right to the water's edge, but someone who owns a property with wetlands be required to observe a 75-foot undisturbed setback? Shouldn't we be doing all that we can to provide for the protection of these bodies of water? The selectmen's concern is primarily based on the unanticipated consequences that will result from these amendments and the litigation that will follow. The financial taking of property of this magnitude will lead to lawsuits against the zoning board, planning board, and the town. The selectmen are extremely impressed by the dedication and effort put forth by the Conservation Commission to bring this issue forward, and they would like to see this effort continue through the collaboration with other parties so that we can have wetland protection regulation that can be supported and are fair. Sincerely, Michael Burnley, on behalf of the selectmen.
Technical question, Okay, so if we are to develop conditional use permits, what is the process? Is that a zoning amendment?
I need
Or
to
is
do
it
some more,
adjournment?
I need to do some more research on it.
We just not in the site regulations.
It'd have to be, no, it'd probably have to be in our zoning. We can issue rules in our site plan review regulations about it, but the criteria for it should be in the zoning.
So if it has to be in our ordinance, then it needs to go on next year's warrant.
That puts us 2 years out for revising our license.
Not necessarily.
We could do both at the same time, but it would be dependent on one passing, and I don't wanna get into that yet, because we're getting way ahead of it.
I'm just trying to get a sense of time, because I feel a sense of urgency, waiting 25 years.
So if it does need to go on next year's warrant, they can both be on the warrant at the same time. It would just be a thing if one passes or one doesn't, then we need to have a plan, you know?
You should submit all of our amendments to the legal council.
We did.
And he can reply to anything.
Well, legally,
Legally, it's
it's
fine.
not red flag.
Yeah, legally, it's
This
fine.
is different.
That's what, I'm looking at. Michael saying, these amendments, in the litigation that will follow. Well, if we submitted this and nothing was.
You get sued for anything. I mean, but, you know, if someone is taking your property, you're probably gonna sue. Okay. You're gonna say that I bought that property and had wetlands on it, and I could use right up to the wetlands, and now you're saying that I can't. Yeah, they're gonna come in and sue. Here's what he's on.
There's plenty of legal theories that could be brought forth on this. Doesn't mean they'll win, but it means the town will have to spend money to defend it.
And you're tied up for a long.
I just want to, there's also the new definition of, you know, what wetlands are. And that's what they that certainly opens up, you know, something like that.
That's the next amendment.
Could you say your name, sir?
That's okay.
Thank you. Did you get that?
Next amendment.
You'll get it.
So I've heard, yeah, right, and it was right correctly, that you would be working with this body on the conditional use permitting process.
Yeah, again, we're gonna get a little bit of that, like
Yeah, and out of the scope of the meeting.
a bit, yeah, I was first off.
Okay, amendment number 8, that is the amendment that puts basically puts a 75-foot buffer around any wetland in town. So we need a motion to either support it or not support it, it doesn't matter either way, and we'll have a roll call over that.
I'll make a motion that we do not support this amendment.
Motion by Michael York, that the planning board not support this amendment number 8, is there a second? Second by Brandon, any further discussion? Okay, Michael, how you go? In favor of not supporting,
Right.
Brandon?
Not supporting it.
Okay, I'm not supporting it. Mark?
I'll just say that I think this is a good amendment, but I think it could be better, with the parties, up to come up with what conditional use aspects and community uses would be. So at this time, I cannot support this amendment.
Richard?
For support.
Support. Victoria?
I I feel a great sense of urgency to move on this. However, I think having a way to have. So for that reason, until we can get a conditional use process in place, which I hope we're going to work for this year and expedite.
Going.
I would like us to have three, so I'm not.
Okay. Charlie?
Not gonna support it.
No, okay, so, and it does not pass. That moves us along to amendment number 9. Then amendment number 9 is adding a section, section 7, article B2, to read as follows. Wetlands include but are not limited to any freshwater wetland, which includes marshes, swamps, bogs, vernal pools, and wooded bottomlands, and any surface waters, including rivers, streams, and intermittent streams, and the land under said waters, excepting flood borders, streams, and designated rivers, lakes, and ponds covered by section 7, shoreline protection district, that should be section 8. Determinations of the boundaries between wetlands and uplands shall be made in accordance with methods outlined in the 1987 U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Wetland Delineation Manual Y-87-1 and the regional supplement to the Corps of Engineers Wetland Delineation Manual, North Central and Northeast Region version 2, or as amended. Well, that's a long one, and that kind of duplicates if we, which we did, turn down number 8. Let me just read. Amendment number 8 would have replaced. Let's see.
Number 9.
Would be- Pardon me?
Sorry, number 9 is adding.
Yeah, it is adding, but I'm just saying that it pertains to what's above that in the first part of it there. And it says this is the definition, the Swanzey wetland, this is what we have now, so this is what's going back in there. Swanzey Wetlands Conservation District is defined as those areas of the town that are inundated or saturated by surface water or groundwater at a frequency and duration sufficient to support, and that under normal conditions does support a prevalence of vegetation adapted for life in saturated soil conditions. The Wetlands Conservation District is sometimes referred to herein as wetlands or wetland areas. That defines a wetland. I don't think we need number 2 in there. Got to say that's word for word the state definition of a wetland anyways. That's exactly what that is. That's what we got it. That's in our zoning now. So I'm just bringing that up. That's correct. Amendment number 9.
Why are we accepting, streams, rivers, lakes and ponds to go to wet? Okay.
Yeah, well,
That should not,
yeah, I see your point. Yeah, right.
ours already
Yeah.
includes that, this one doesn't include it.
Okay, you want to make a motion for that article, or is there any discussion? I mean, get some discussion here.
Give an explanation as to why it was not important to have it.
I think in the spirit, if it's written here, it's because we incorporated shoreline, we're covering the shoreline protection, which is in New Hampshire, level.
So this is making this consistent with state definitions, is that the point?
Well, if you're on a lake or a river, then you have to divide that as shoreline protection.
And that's not as restricted as what's proposed here. But they have a setback for building setback in the shoreline protection. We have a 125 feet. State requires, I think, 50 feet, something like that. We have 125 in the town of Swanzey here. But again, that's a setback for the primary structure. Not anything to do with driveway going through there or using land or mowing it or anything like that. So there's that.
The speculation is, lakes, rivers are used differently than that. So, the lake that was backyard, the nice thing to do. Not having a second pressure.
The buffer is out now anyway.
This is the definition, so I'm just wondering what this definition does for us that we didn't have.
The definition before did not include necessarily all these things. I think vernal pools were mentioned before. So it was like an A, B, and C before, and so we put it all together into one paragraph, and we added a couple of things to it.
So this is a more comprehensive definition of the. word
Exactly.
wetland. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm in favor. All right, good. Thank you.
Any questions from the public about the Article 9 here? Yeah. Definitions.
I'd like to hear from the people who wouldn't like to approve number 9. What's wrong with making the definition a little bit more precise? And again, the Shoreline Protection Act covers all those bodies on the class 4 rivers and the ponds in ways that help preserve those bodies. And so I'm not sure why excluding it is a problem in that sense. And being more precise with the definition can only be good, as far as I'm concerned.
As far as I'm concerned, it's duplicating what the definition of a wetland is in our ordinance there. Again, it's taken from the state definition of wetland. That's how we got that in there. And it seems to serve, unless you've left out some wetlands that aren't included in that.
So you're saying basically that you wouldn't like to see the ordinance have repetitive language in it, is what the real issue is.
That's not the real issue, but yeah, that's a good point there. Yeah, repetitive is not always good. Generally, when the planning board gets a project in front of us and there's a discrimination between whether, you know, is that a wetland or not a wetland? There's always a soil scientist brought on board to take a look at it. So if it's a wetland there, they're gonna find it and it's gonna be mapped out there. And that's what we do. Anybody else? Need a motion to support or not support it?
Chair, I make a motion, we support this, amendment 9.
Motion by Mark to support amendment number 9.
Sorry.
And it's read and seconded by Richard. Is there any further discussion on that? Then roll call, we'll start again with you, Michael.
Okay, I'll support it.
Support it. Brandon?
I'll support it.
Support. Me, I don't support it. Mark?
I support it.
Richard?
Sorry.
I
Victoria?
support it, and I think it's good to have it on the word, because it will help people understand what wetlands are. I think it's going to be in the future. The more information that I think.
Okay. Charlie? Support. So it passes. That one will be on the warrant article. Number 10, amendment 10. That's amend section 7, article D. Oh, just a second. Let's go back to that number 9. There's just a typographical in there where it mentions section 7. That should be section 8. Shoreline Protection District.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And that can be changed without any further discussion. Just a grammatical error in there. So it should be 8. Section 8. Pardon me? Yes, it should, where it mentions, it refers to lakes and ponds covered by section, and it says section 7, it should be section 8 in all of those folders. Okay. Ready? Amendment number 10. Amend section 7, article D to read as follows: uses permitted. Uses permitted in the wetlands conservation district, provided that all required permits have been obtained, are as follows. We are crossing out water impoundments to the extent that wildlife considerations will allow in the construction of wells for water supply, and we're adding in construction of wells for water supply or man-made ponds as permitted by New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. We're removing number 2, which is drainage ways, streams, creeks, or other paths of normal runoff. We're, let's see, skipping over the next one because we aren't changing that at all. We are crossing out parks and such recreation uses as are consistent with the purpose and intent of section C. And we're adding in conservation areas and footpaths, footbridges, and boardwalks, providing for pedestrian recreational uses such as fishing, hunting, hiking, bird watching, and nature study, provided said structures are constructed so as to permit the unobstructed flow of water and the natural contour of the wetlands as is preserved. We're crossing out or getting rid of or deleting, however we want to say it, conservation areas and natural trail as the use. That's the open spaces permitted. That hasn't changed, so that will stay in there. Number 6, we are crossing out forestry and tree farming in wetlands, and adding forest management and tree farming within 75 feet of wetlands, consistent with the best management practices published by the National Department of Resources and Economic Development and the UNH Cooperative Extension. Number 8, we're getting rid of agriculture and wetlands, and we're adding agriculture within 75 feet of wetlands where it does not impair the function and values of the adjacent wetlands, consistent with the best management practices published by the New Hampshire Department of Agriculture, Market, and Food. Number 9, we are getting rid of the construction or reconstruction of fences, footbridge, catwalks, wharfs, and structures, and enhance the site. That enhance the site as well as that provided. And we're getting rid of provided said structures are constructed so as to permit the unobstructed flow of water, and getting rid of the natural contours of the wetland reserve. And we're getting rid of alteration of surface configuration of the land by filling or dredging, provided that, and we're getting rid of the alteration enhances the wetland wildlife aspect of the site, and the natural contour of the wetland is preserved. Number 11, we're getting rid of construction of streets, roads, and other access ways, and pipelines, power lines, and other transmission lines, and replacing it with maintaining, repairing, or replacing existing and lawfully located structures, public utilities, streets, roads, and access ways. provided that the work conforms to the general standards adopted in this section. That's a long one. So, a lot of uses that, getting rid of, a lot of uses changing around the words that there. So there are some changes which seem kind of minimal, but they aren't. Because number 6, for instance, getting rid of forestry and tree farming in wetlands. And you're restricting it to within the 75 feet of wetlands.
Is that a restriction, Scott?
It would be a restriction. It would, these are under permitted uses.
So it's permitted within 75 feet,
So
that doesn't permit, that also prevents it with 150 feet.
it has been permitted in wetlands.
I know. So the restriction is there, but not the 75 foot isn't a restriction.
Now, if it isn't permitted in the wetlands, it's only permitted outside of the wetlands.
Right.
So that's a restriction, right?
Yeah, I just didn't think the 75 foot was a restriction.
It isn't, but it says it here. So, I mean, that's what we're reading here. This is
Well, it
what-
says permitted, it's a permitted use, not a restriction.
Okay, yeah.
Because it's allowed in the wetland now.
I know, so that's a restriction,
Yeah.
saying it's not allowed as a wetland. But the saying that it's within 75 feet is not a restriction. It's allowed within 75 feet, that's a permission.
And number 8, agriculture in wetlands, same thing. You can't do agriculture in wetlands anymore. You can do it within 75 feet of the wetlands. Says. Oh. Yeah, well, it depends how this goes. I don't know, because we're, let's see, crossing out conservation areas and natural trails. We've crossed that one out. Let's see, what else have we crossed out? We're not allowing drainage ways, streams, creeks, or other paths of normal runoff, water runoff, or runoff water rather. I don't see why we need to get rid of that one. But we are getting rid of it in here.
May I say something?
Yes, you may.
I think even without the amendment 8, I think amendment 10, this amendment here, is permitted, is a step in the right direction. I don't see why we should permit agriculture and forestry in a wetland. Why would we need to do that? And also, I think there are very few other uses here that are really changed. They're just better defined. We couldn't even understand what the heck number 2 meant. That's why we crossed it out. I think this brings a lot more clarity. I think the previous language was unclear and we tossed around, well, what does this even mean? So I think this as written actually provides some reasonable protection for wetlands.
Okay. So let's see. We say we're crossing out water impoundments to the extent that wildlife considerations will allow and construction of wells for water supply, replacing that with construction of wells for water supply or man-made ponds as permitted. Well, isn't a man-made pond a water impoundment?
Yes. Water impoundments can also be damming up a brook.
Talking about a dam.
Yep.
So the construction and reconstruction of fences, footbridges, catwalks, work. So
Working all these.
fences will no longer be allowed in the wetlands. And an alteration of the surface configuration of the land by filling or dredging, provided that, you know, they can enhance its wetland, wildlife aspect of the site, natural contour of the wetlands preserved. That's under number. We have, okay, construction of streets, roads, and other access ways, and pipelines, power lines, and other transmission lines, we're getting rid of that. And just leaving maintaining, repairing, or replacing existing and lawfully located structures, public utilities, streets, roads, and access ways, provided that the work conforms to the general standards adopted in this section. Which are what are the general standards we're talking about here? Anybody know what those general standards are?
Requirements.
Not sure. Number 11, maintaining, repairing, that's the one we're reading, right? Okay. Number 11 is maintaining, repairing, replacing existing.
The general standard where those.
Okay, the next thing,
I'm not sure what they are. That's it.
So no streets or roads be allowed anymore
In weather,
in the wetlands, you know, and or the transmission lines or any of that type of stuff.
I think this as the compromise, as someone who would like to see a buffer around wetlands, I think this is adopting this or recommending this amendment allows us to enhance our wetlands protections in an important way, so I'm in favor of this.
I would say that removing some things like actually happening on page 30 that should never have happened.
Exactly.
And that's what's pretty important. But there are things in here that might require going to zoning, so it is. I don't think there's going to be a lot of instances of that. So,
Well, in a lot of the site plans that we see here, and, you know, some of those detention ponds and drainage ways are directed towards those wetlands. And if we're not allowing any disturbance or anything like that, then that kind of leaves that stuff out. That's a good point. What were you going to say, sir?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, John Inman with Fieldstone Land Consultants, just reading through that the way it's written, so it's striking out construction of streets, roads, and other access ways. By approving that, you would end up saying that you can't have a driveway crossing a wet portion of your, so if your property was wet along the road frontage. And you have dry property back, you now can't get a driveway into there, even though the state allows it, but if you pass it, you would be going for a variance.
Pretty much is what.
Or
it's saying.
anything crossing the wetland.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pretty
Thank you.
substantial.
Yeah, thank you. Also, the number 10 that we're leaving out, alteration of the surface configuration, of the land by filling or dredging. Again, if you were to put a driveway like you just told us here, that entails filling or dredging or whatever. You know, to do that driveway, so you're saying that can't be done either. There are restrictions, the alteration enhances the wetland and wildlife of the site, we can't disturb that. Natural contour of the wetland is preserved, in other words, contour line drainage, everything is disturbed. I think that amendment needs a lot more work, number 10. We're ready to discuss it and vote on it, or are we doing anybody behind us? No. Nobody for discussion? No, I'll make a motion that we don't approve it because it needs more work. Seconded by Brandon. Any further discussion?
I think the comment is.
Yeah.
We're saying now it needs more work. We've been at this for 2 months.
Exactly.
Why couldn't we?
Because
Why couldn't you bring up your objections then?
We did, you guys shut us down.
I brought up objections, maybe not that particular one right there, but I brought up many objections to this, and there wasn't too much of a compromise. Interested in, so you know, here we are. The board voted by consensus to bring this as it's written to this public hearing, so that's what we're doing with it right now. Going it up or down. The motion in a second. And the motion is not to recommend amendment 10.
Yes, on the motion.
Yes on the motion. Brandon? Yes, deny it. Yes, Scott, yes, deny it. Mark?
I'm for it.
For it. Gregory's for it. For it. For it. Okay, that one passes. That will go on to the warrant. That was amendment 11, amendment 10, sorry. Now we're bringing to amendment number 11, amend section 7, article E, to read as follows. And we're crossing out special provisions and we're replacing that with requirements. And it reads, no leach field, septic tank, pump chamber, or dry well may be located closer than 125 feet to any designated wetland. We're crossing that part out and replacing it with 75 feet of wetlands. In other words, you can put it at 75 feet. Expansion of any existing system to accommodate additional loading shall be considered new construction. In instances of septic failure certified by the town of Swanzey health officer, and again, crossing out 125 and replacing with 75 foot requirement is waived if a licensed septic designer certifies to the health officer that a 125-foot, dropping that out, replacement of 75 feet setback is not possible in the event the system can be replaced with state specifications. Number two, the WCD, which won't be in there anymore, but anyway, WCD excluding bodies of water may be used to satisfy minimum lot area and setback requirements, provided that 75% of the minimum required lot size is contiguous, non-wetland, and that the contiguous non-wetland area is sufficient in size and configuration to adequately accommodate all required utilities such as wellhead and sewage disposal for on-site septic tanks and leach fields. Number three, no new structure or building, excuse me, greater than 100 square feet in area shall be located within 75 feet of wetlands. No parking areas may be located within 75 feet of wetlands. No underground fuel tanks, fuel storage tanks or tanks containing other hazardous materials shall be placed in the WCD. No soil removal or change to the surface topography of soil or modification of existing drainage characteristics, including disturbance of water levels, water table, or water runoff patterns shall be allowed in the WCD. Number seven. No dumping, discharging, or placement of fill of any kind shall be allowed in the WCD. Number eight, no storage of junkyard materials or equipment such as construction equipment, vehicles, or anything containing hazardous substances within the WCD unless housed in an allowed structure such as a covered garden shed. Number nine, all wetland buffers area within 75 feet of wetlands will be required to remain in a naturally vegetated state or be planted to native vegetation without regular mowing, spraying of pesticides or herbicides or other activity that will damage the buffer's ability to filter and flow water entering or leaving the wetland area. Comments on number 11. Who wants to speak in favor of that? Anybody?
I have a question for Sarah. You were our town planner when we established the 125-foot setback. Do you?
No, I was, but not when it was established. It was there before I
Okay.
came into town.
Because we keep trying to figure out what the origin of that number is.
I don't know.
Can't get it out. Thank you.
It was picked out of thin air. Barbara, I don't see it, but I hear it. Go ahead.
Were you asking the origin of the 125-foot setback? There have been studies that have shown that nutrients do move through soils at 9 to 90 feet or more. And we were expecting to be protective. We have a variety of soils in Swanzey, mostly a lot of sandy soil. So the percolation rate is quite high, or fast. I don't know what the proper term is. Anyway, so we did not pull that out of thin air. We pulled it based on the studies that were in existence at that time, which I have provided to the planning board in the past. So in my opinion, we are giving up a lot to say 75 feet. You know, that's what the state uses for septic systems, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's correct. And I would say that we should at the most go to 100. Because again, studies have shown that nutrients do pass through the soils beyond 75 feet.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. Just a second. Yes, ma'am.
Just a recommend, Vicky Scalera, just a recommendation, unless I missed it. If you pass this, you should define WCD in the beginning somewhere.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll get to that.
Bill, I felt very much the board of selectmen. Except for items 1 and 2, a good portion of the balance is a rehash of the first Article 8. You're again putting in a 75-foot setback, which doesn't currently exist. So it would constitute a taking. It would mean that someone couldn't build that ADU that they might otherwise be able to build. Our recommendation would be the same as what we requested with regard to 8 through 12, which is that they go for further study. And you've already indicated that there are many people that have indicated a willingness to participate. If we all agree, this is a good concept, we just like to see it fully fleshed out.
Yeah, thank you.
That's 75. There's no way to sum up they've already done that. That's, we can't use the 75 on the set, that's what. So. Yeah, basically, or excuse me, number 11,
Yeah.
basically,
We still have to vote on it though. Any other comments from the public on that number 11? Yes.
I guess one of my concerns is, with the limited things that are allowed in that conservation district, that it says no dumping of material. If you wanted a garden, no one can bring you a load alone, it's not legal. You know, they're just, if you think of all of the things that aren't specified in this, you're constricting people's use of their land, you know, way more than I feel it should be done. That's my opinion. But you're taking people's land, you're taking their ability to use it. You're not giving them anything. And there's no compensation there. I just disagree with this whole section.
Thank you. Anybody else? Then let's see, we still need to vote on whether we're recommending this article, amendment number 11 or not recommending. Want to make a motion for that? Recommend it?
Make a motion that we deny it.
Motion by Brandon that we not recommend number 11 to go on the ballot. Is there a second? Second by Richard Lane. Any further discussion? Okay, roll call vote. Oh, just a second.
I would just say, it's a shame all these things are here because there's 4 or 5 of them I think are very important. But unfortunately, the other ones do go contrary to amendment.
Okay, Michael York,
not recommended.
not recommended. Brandon, not recommended. I do not recommend it. Mark, no.
No.
No. Richard, Victoria, no. Darling, no. Okay, that number 11 will not be on the ballot. Okay, now we're on amendment number 12. And that is to add section 7, article F to read as follows. Areas exempted from this section. Areas exempted from this section will include wetlands associated with currently functioning and maintained man-made ditches and stormwater treatment swales, sedimentation and or detention basins or ponds, agricultural and irrigation ponds or swales, fire ponds, cisterns, and related facilities. And then it goes on to say, to be exempted, such features may not have been constructed as part of a compensatory mitigation or created in what were previously jurisdictional wetlands. Okay, so then these are areas that are exempted from this section, meaning the wetlands section. Any discussion on that? Comments on it? I think that's one I could maybe even vote for.
Go ahead, make a motion.
I will make a motion for Article 12 beyond the warrant. So second, and we'll all seconded by Mark. Any further discussion? Okay. Michael York.
Yeah.
Yes. Brandon. Yes. Scott. Yes. Mark.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Richard, yes. Victoria. Yes. Charlie. Yes. Okay, that one will go on to the warrant. And that concludes the public hearing of warrant articles for the wetland district. Now we'll close the hearing. Bringing up to item number 2. Ready to be in the public hearing. Yeah, we're doing. Okay, petition zoning amendment for zone based on road.
They all drive by the road. They all.
We're getting there. Conditional approval. And sometimes have it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But we got it.
Yeah. So I should have put that, implement that. As soon as possible. So the best thing is to be.
You can say it. I'm sure it'll- I'm glad that you get it.
So, Ryan, there's only.
That's not what they did. But it's still
Well, no, she will.
Would you like to do it here?
Yeah. And then she.
Sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we're getting back to the.
Everybody else.
Got another public hearing. Another public hearing to go.
Hopefully.
And this public hearing is the petition zoning amendment, that's rezoning of Base Hill Road. And I think I mentioned before, this is put under petition, so yes, we're gonna have a public hearing, we're required to anyways, we're gonna discuss it, get public input on it. So regardless of what the board votes on tonight, it's going on the ballot because of the petition. So I'm gonna open up that zoning, open up that hearing, and that, again, that's on the rezoning of Base Hill Road.
So Chair, are we actually voting on it? Voting,
Well,
is a recommendation?
we vote, yeah, we vote one way or another. The planning board already voted by consensus not to support it. And that was on our November 14th meeting. But we also said that they could bring in a petition to the selectmen with 25 signatures or more, which is what they did, to rezone that down there. And as anyone can do. But the planning board didn't support it. The planning board didn't support this one at our November 14th meeting because it was too much like spot zoning. And when you start that, it opens up a whole door of spot zoning for the entire town. It was just two small little, I don't know, small little parcels being split up between different uses there.
Meeting.
So anyways, the public hearing is open. I'm gonna read just basically what's going on here. So this is a proposal to rezone Base Hill Road to residence district. The zoning, and I'm reading, this is just what's on the petition right here, so I'm reading that for now. It might not be word for word what's on the article, but this is what it does. The zoning map of the town of Swanzey dated 9/1/47. As amended, is to be further amended as follows. Lots fronting on Base Hill Road shall all be included in the residence district with the following exceptions. Lots between New Runbrook and Route 10, which are currently in commercial industrial district, shall remain in the district. In that district, tax map 212, lots 22 and 23, and map 203, lots 4, 30, and 29. Tax map 203, lots 14, 20, 22, and 26 shall remain in the business district. Tax map 203, lots 8, 13, and 20-1 shall be included in the rural agricultural district. A portion of tax map 203, lot 25, with an eastern boundary equal to the abutting lots on either side shall be included in the residence district. And it went on to, got all the signatures they needed, and we're having a public hearing. And any discussion on this, any questions on this, they can be answered tonight. So does anyone have any questions on it? I know the board doesn't. Is that fair? Any questions on it? Yes,
My understanding is that, this is an attempt to correct what might have been an error in zoning a long time back. And it looks to me as though there's a business area encroaching on a residential area, and it may have been an error in the original zoning. And this is an attempt to correct that, because a lot of the things that you read, it sounds like it's an awful lot of this is that and this is that. But a lot of those things are staying in the zoning that they already are in, and then some are moving. And it just seems to me that this is an attempt to fix something that was busted before. And I'd like to have other people's perspectives on that, because I'm not a longtime resident of Swanzey. But that's what I think is going on here.
okay. What do you think is going on here, Sharon? You're the one presenting it, correct?
Sarah, did you want to go first? Did you have something to say?
Barbara.
Barbara? I was just gonna say, I agree, if you look at the uses on that road, I mean, basically, it looks like a residential area with a few businesses in there. So it's kind of hard to say, oh, well, it's zone business, so it should be business when the main use is residential. And so I don't know what would happen, you talk about spot zoning, and this is a question, Scott. What happens if you zoned it all residential and then those become, what do you call the uses? Non-conforming? Unconventional uses that are grandfathered.
Non-conforming.
Or non-conforming, yeah, that are grandfathered, and then that use stays with the property until it changes. Somebody stops using it as that, right?
Yeah, but that was the concern that the planning board member, some of the planning board had on that, is that if you did that, the businesses that are there will be non-conforming.
Right.
And any expansion, any change, anything at all they wanted to do there, they have to go to the zoning board of adjustment for a variance, not a special exception, which is very difficult to do. And it's not fair, again, in my opinion, for those property owners that bought that property as a business, using it as a business, suddenly have that taken away from them, able to expand it or change it in any other way.
So how do you correct this imbalance that's occurred on the road? I mean, well, if it's not through the way that was petitioned, what is another way to correct that?
Well, the imbalance you're talking about is a mixed use of residential and commercial, correct?
With the majority of these being residential.
So what is this gonna solve? I mean, if this zoning goes through, what's it gonna solve?
It's going to maintain the residents for the rest of the road. So those people will know that they're going to be living next door to another residential property, and that there's not going to be an expansion of the commercial use. Which is, it's gonna kind of.
And that may or may not happen by itself. Who knows? It's happened like that now. Some of those properties will never be developed commercial because there's not room on there for commercial. They will remain residential, even though they're in a business district.
But there's no assurance of that.
No assurance unless you own the property. That's what private property is about. If you
No.
own the property.
So Scott,
I mean, in terms of zoning,
Yeah.
in terms of zoning, there's no assurance. In terms of zoning, it can be converted.
Or maybe whatever is allowed on that piece
Right.
of property. If you bought a piece of property that was zoned commercial or commercial industrial, like some of that is down there.
Yes.
Then you fully intend to, maybe fully intend to develop it with that in mind. If that's taken away from you, then you don't have it.
So the only way to keep it as it currently is being used, as opposed to how it's currently being zoned, is to rezone it.
so my question is, are the property owners like Sherry, are they non-conforming uses right now in the business district?
You mean a residential?
Yeah, they are not in a residential district, they're in a business district.
That's right, yeah.
So if they stop treating their residents as a personal residence, then they cannot develop, they cannot put expand or a subdivided or whatever and put another residence on there because it's business district. Isn't that the same sort of restriction you're talking about for the business owners? Aren't they also having their property restricted? And I'm just saying that it works both ways.
It is in a roundabout convoluted
And so-
sort of way,
So that's what I'm saying. That's why this needs to be fixed.
but I do believe, go ahead. No, sir, you're gonna. that residence is allowed in the business zone or in the commercial industrial zone. I'm afraid exactly.
There are no residences allowed in the business zone
So
anymore.
change that.
Only multifamily.
Change that.
So it's not that it's allowed or not, but a one-family dwelling, two-family dwelling, or manufactured housing dwelling established prior to the adoption of the subparagraph on a lot in the business district. So any residences that are in this district shall be considered to be permitted use in the business district and shall not be subject to section 11 Article A.
And does that mean that if they're no longer used as a residence, they have to be a business?
No, it does not mean that. It means they're allowed as a allowable use, permitted use.
If they're permitted use, if they
That,
were established prior.
that property then is permitted to be residential in perpetuity.
Those are the property.
Yeah.
Generally.
One family dwelling, two family
Okay.
dwelling, or
Okay.
manufactured housing.
So that takes a little bit of my concern away. I just still think this is we're trying to fix the zoning in that area.
Well, I think the main complaint is the traffic on that road. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, it is a bigger
Yes.
complaint on the road.
The main complaint is the traffic on that road.
Yeah, and consider it's a class 5 road, and it was always made for basically the farmers that were there, way back. That when Margot owned the property, it's only designed, that road's designed just to have him get to his fields. To actually hay them at the time and move his cows back and forth. So class 5 road has no breakdown lane, it's not a highway. And I think we need to have some kind of consideration for the mile that is Keene and that they're all low density residential homes. They have voiced their opinion with us, the residents on Swanzey. Over 50 or 60% of them don't want to have any more commercial business on that road due to the fact of the traffic already kind of overextended and burdening the road.
Yeah.
And it's an important area. It's a very uniquely different road than anything in Swansea. I am not seeing anything that's happening mostly in Keene and partly in Swansea that connects from highway to highway. So everybody that wants to, it's a great cut through. They're not conducive to the speed limit. I watched somebody today with an 18-wheeler that was not obviously delivering product on the road because there's no through road signs on both ends. He was just traveling right through and also a food truck that went through, that's an 18-wheeler or a semi truck.
I know, I'm sure I've seen
Okay.
it personally, yeah.
So I think the road can't handle more on a level of a commercial or business sizes that exceed more than one business or big commercial development. It's not gonna be able to handle it. And I've checked with the Southwestern Regional Planning Commission, and in their opinion, a courtesy that I made to the businesses that are there, that they are grandfathered in to use their property and transport their equipment and vehicles and trucks as they have been doing for decades on that road. They are not going to be restricted. So I think that was their major concern. And we wanted to be considerate of that for them because they are part of the road. And they've been there. And we've, no offense to them, but we've been putting up with this traffic and travel for years. We just don't want to see any more of it coming here. It doesn't deserve the use that it's already taken, but we don't want to have more of it happening. Especially that there's a New Run Brook and a huge wetland that has a floodplain. And that does have a huge buffer that's right up against it. And that needs to be preserved. On our thoughts on the road.
Your zoning is gonna do that. There's someone behind you that's had her hand up for a long time. Yes, ma'am.
It's just like, I bought my house as a residential house, and then 2 years ago, the house right side of me, which is only about 50 feet from me, was being sold by a realtor, and they were gonna put a bagel shop there. Now, a bagel shop with only 50 feet between us, you know, that could run all night. So your residential is shot.
Yes, sir.
Matt Robinson, I own BDM Sweeper Arlington Paving. So I understand the concerns of all the neighbors and everything on the street. And, you know, we use the street. We go out to Swanzey End. I mean, obviously that building's been there, you know, since I believe the late 60s when W.L. Barassa ran out of there. There was also a concrete plant that was across the street in that building that used to be Hill Construction. I think once you get up farther on the street, you know, past our places, I do think that becomes a rural residential road. But mainly, at least everywhere that I've seen, when you have businesses, there needs to be a path for those businesses to get to the main road through that district. And I guess what my point would be, and then I have a question, is somehow it's only fair to people that are buying in that other section. And if you count the businesses up that road, I believe there's 7 or 8, and I'm doing a little bit of guessing, but you know, looking at that road, at least they know that they're gonna have that traffic. And then I guess my question is, so the way I understood it is, for instance, say our company moves out of there and someone else wants to move in there, what's the ramifications of using that building? Because now they're in.
It'd have to be the same use, then it could be used, but if someone else wanted to put a different use in there, then not gonna happen.
And that's, I think, a real problem, because then you have basically devalued the property.
Or if you wanted to change or expand your building, and that was in residential, you'd have to be the ZBA and. Get a variance.
Yeah, that's one.
That's where my concerns are.
Well, mine is, my concern.
I think when you go up the road farther, you know, the other issue that I really see, and I live on Keene, on the very opposite other end of the road at the same address, 93 Base Hill Road. Because there's 2 of the same addresses.
Yeah, which is, I think it's very frustrating for us.
Just kind of bringing that up.
Yeah.
In case somebody that does fire and ambulance wants to
Yeah.
think about how that should be changed around.
Yeah. Yeah, then you gotta really know that.
And this.
But when you get up the other end, we have the traffic on the other end. The no through truck signs, I mean, I believe if you look into the legalities of the federal government, if a town or a city, and please do not quote me on that, but if towns and cities take any federal funding, that they really can't host their roads, and that's why it's really not enforceable. Everyone puts the signs up, but every city and stuff that you go into, you know, it doesn't get enforced.
No, if the zoning goes through, it's probably not gonna help your traffic problem at all.
No,
Yes,
Well, it's gonna.
we don't want it to increase.
Right.
Like Sherry said, you know, the traffic we have now is fine, but if you look at that road now, where that bridge is, they have paved on both sides of it, because the culvert under that bridge is completely flattened. And with more traffic going over it, it's not gonna last forever.
Yeah, nothing does.
I'm just curious, I thought the amendment, because I haven't read it in detail. I thought the amendment exempted certain properties and left them as business.
Yeah.
So that means that if they're not changed, and the zoning isn't changed, then that means if they sell the business and some other business comes in, they have to go to the planning board to get that business approved, but they would be an approved use because they're still business district.
Right.
So I don't understand where there's a taking there, Scott. I don't understand. Maybe you
The
can-
taking is the ones that aren't, like, I think your business you're saying is gonna be in the residential or not?
No, it's not.
No.
Changed. Those 3
No.
lots that are business in the half a mile down Swanzey, Base Hill Road, is saying business. They are grandfathered in to do what they're doing.
Grandfather is different than.
It's different. No, it's staying.
But
Staying in the zone, so there's
But
no
it's in the
grandfather.
business zone, and they can do what they've been doing for the last 30 years there.
And anybody comes.
On the
in-
road with what their equipment and stuff. Okay, so they're staying that way. The rest of them, how many people below that didn't even know they were in the commercial industrial zone? And they don't wanna be in that zone anymore. They're all single family homes, they're, half of them on the east side are less than even a half an acre big. And they're sitting right on top of New Run Brook, and the wetlands in their backyard.
So there's no danger that they're gonna be developed industrially, is that what you're saying?
Mine is gonna be,
Why not change it?
Yeah, why think there's no danger there?
Because people want it to be residential, they don't want commercial industrial.
It's residential anyway.
Okay, so I see, all-purpose storage, they
Yeah.
changed the 3 acre business to no change. But they, not 7 acres business, they changed it to rural agricultural, then the rural agricultural one, they're changing the wetlands.
And that's the one
That's what I'm
that,
gonna bring up. So.
right, and that's the one,
There are businesses who have bought property in this district who will be changing it. And I don't see them represented here tonight, which they were noticed. But not all of them are staying the same. There are some that are changing, at least being proposed to be changed to rural agricultural. So I do want that just noted for the record, that there are businesses being changed over.
23 is being changed from business to residence too.
And that is a newly subdivided lot.
Correct.
There. So,
it's just like, the neighbor right side of me, he's right tight to the brook. But his was going to be a bagel shop.
Well, unless it came to the planning board, it wasn't gonna be a bagel shop. Had to come here first. If it was too close, then it wouldn't work.
I think the main thing I wanted to highlight there is that lot 20 and 20-1, they did just recently spend a good deal of money subdividing those here. And so they invested in that land, and now it's not going to be able to be used for purposes that they want to use it for. So that wouldn't be an issue, I think.
well, if they're not local and if Swansea residents don't want something on that level built in that lot, why not be a voice for this road to change that?
Well, if you wanna control a piece of property like that, you just have to buy it.
Well, that's what we're working on.
You should.
No, I was just gonna make that point.
Yeah.
If they're trying to purchase that property next to Old Purpose. And make the change to the zone.
Still they do, still like taking the property rights, and then when they had intended to develop it, zone as it is now, it's changed, but again.
See, what the other problem was, when that project was proposed, they didn't seem to have a problem taking our property right from 5 or 6 abutters against that property,
What rights did they take from you?
building a commercial sized structure and will depreciate the value of these homes in that area. And it was proven,
Right, but that's not a real property, they didn't take any of your property rights away, but you're
they
you're talking about
did.
taking their property, the rights to develop that property.
But I'm taking consideration that they were stealing our property values of the properties that
My
we've been
sister's
living in
pen
there.
is taken up.
They're taking that from us.
That's, yeah.
It depreciates the value of our homes.
You're free to view it how you wanna view it. but-
And that's exactly what was gonna happen.
If you didn't want to live in that district, why'd you buy a house next to those businesses, just out of curiosity?
It wasn't.
It
built up
wasn't
like it
there.
was, And it wasn't
Those
offered to us.
businesses across the street and next to you.
It wasn't offered to me.
I bought my property at 5042 Base Hill. I'm Deb
Can
Sprague.
you identify yourself?
The only business that was there, May 26, 1975, was Hilly's.
Did you say that's great, man?
Yeah.
Great.
So
Yeah.
50 years in May.
Okay, anything else?
I just wanted to, as somebody who served on his own network for a while, I just want to echo your sentiment, just reading through this list, it is spot zone. And from a planning board perspective, I would think you would take into consideration that if there is a business that's being used and there's a danger of use, still a business, you look at it from a buffering standpoint, it seems to me in your regs. So now, where that was a business that was either in a commercial zone or a business zone, now it's bracketed by residences. So now it's gotta meet whatever your buffering requirements are.
You're right, yeah, you're right.
And it's gonna be a nightmare for the planner to know which zone this particular property is in. With regard to all-purpose storage, they are going to build on that property, whether you rezone it or not. They're already in the queue. The zoning board's gone through the court process. And I've been in discussions with them, they are gonna build, regardless of whether they change to rural. My point would be, I hope the planning board will not recommend the proposed petition or.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes. Make a motion, we've already not recommended it, but we can have an official motion at the hearing here to recommend it.
Is it gonna be on the ballot?
Motion by Brandon, not to recommend this go on the ballot, or not recommended by the planning board, it's gonna go on the ballot, it's not recommended by the planning board. You're seconding that? Okay, I'll do a roll call vote.
Yes, I'm not recommending.
Not recommending it.
Not
Brandon, I'm not recommending it. Mark,
I recommend this.
recommend it. Richard? No.
I think
Victoria?
it's recommended.
Yes. Charlie? Yes. So what does that give us now? I lost count. 4-3, okay, so the planning board does not recommend it on a 4-3. So. Closing the public hearing, probably should have done that before we voted, but I'm closing the public hearing. And that's a dumb matter. Again, it's going on the ballot.
Bill goes on the
so
ballot. When you.
Even though the planning board doesn't recommend it, it's going to be voted.
Make the changes. Common sense.
Also, we have the voluntary merger.
We can do what
I
they're
see that
doing.
word. And
And
Michele
the
Mack
people want to help
requested a
you.
voluntary merger between tax maps 225, lot 54.
Should be back.
They're gonna build on it, it's gonna go on a ballot.
Well, that's. Right.
These guys are beer line.
Excuse me, everybody, if you're gonna continue talking, can you please, just move more over there? We have one more item to discuss. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
For you, we would do that.
Thank you, sir.
So we're on that merger. And there's no public hearing for it or anything like that. They've given us in the packet, the warrant these comments.
Yeah, sorry, it's the voluntary merger between tax map 225 lot 54 and tax map 225 lot 55. This does not require a public hearing, it's just a formality to present this to the planning board. They have all the paperwork they need presented to the departments. You have me now.
We all have maps of it. You take a look at it. I don't have one.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah,
yeah.
I want to see that one. That's here. And they're taking out this kind of property, right?
Yeah.
And merging those two. Everybody see what's going on? They're removing that set of property line.
There are two houses. I walked the property. There's like two houses, one he rents on the beach and one he lives in.
So the garage, sorry, and the house on the other one right there.
Good question.
He lives in the garage. He lives in one of the houses and he rents the other.
Okay, so he don't have an ADU there then. That's very well in unit.
He did tell me at one point, he did tell me that once his renters lease ends, he might tear down that house. I don't know if that's still in the works or not.
I think they are, that's what I talked to them about.
Well, it has nothing to do really with the merger there. Again, everyone sees what's going on here. You see it, you got a map down there. You got it on the others, okay. It's pretty straightforward. Creates no new lots, because merging two lots together, and if they ever want to separate them, they have to come to the planning board for. They can do it.
No, they
You know,
can't.
they can't, they don't have the frontage on.
Oh, you're right.
So they can't do it anyway, they can't put it back, so once they're merged together, that's it, they're one. So.
And that's in the paperwork.
Yes, so. Anybody, anything, a motion to approve the online, not online, the voluntary merger, seconded by Brandon, is there any further discussion? All those in favor, indicate by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Okay, so that is.
Tonight.
Thanks, Scott.
Okay, so there's nothing more. I do have just one thing. Pass this around. And this is a state proposal for fixing the intersection on, was it Swanzey Factory Road and where Route 101 is there. We all go out there where the river is. You can't even see to the left there, coming up over there. So that's what this is right here. And the state is proposing to move it. As you can see, I'll pass it around anyway, and to move it somewhere, to the east, and then put a roundabout in that, so I'm just gonna have it down here.
Circle City. Yes.
It's not a done deal, but we're just commenting on it, commenting about it or whatever. Okay. Oh, no, it's a- Is there anything else for the good of the order? Anybody else have any other comments on here?
Yeah, the 101 project.
Yep.
Is, they're gonna discuss it on the select, on.
Coming up soon. Okay.
It really doesn't have anything to do with Swansea.
It does, they're rerouting Swanzey Factory Road.
You're routing it, but it's supposed to keep running.
It is, however, during construction, it's going to reroute traffic, and on top of that, I think it's roundabout, it's gonna reroute traffic over.
Yes, regional impact.
Are any buildings proposed to be removed for that roundabout?
They might be.
We'll have to find out that here.
They might be buildings, but also this alternative is technically not set.
Yes, I don't know.
This is
They're about
one
here,
of
I'll see.
as like. In opposition to like building a new bridge or all the other alternative.
Because this is the river, right? And it's not.
You can't see when you're coming out.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, you can't see over the bridge at all.
So
So that would be that, yeah, meeting in February on that. Anybody wants to participate or take a look in on it there, you might pass it across.
Next week.
Updates, yeah, you have an update from your committee or anything like that? Or-
Oh, we're basically done. We're gonna start having our, open houses, the 11th, the 18th, and the 25th, from 11 to, and the Swanzey Center Station.
This is for the fire station. we're
The
talking
fire
about.
station.
Okay, gotcha.
And Jay has posted the cost per house and all that. You'd have to look at that. I know for 200,000, it's like what, $30?
It's $15 per 100,000, so, it was the projected cost from Michael Brandon on what the bond would cost. So that means if you have a $200,000 house, it costs you $30 extra in taxes per year.
Thank you, Jay. Jay was the chairman of that committee there and you did an incredible amount of work on that thing.
Your help and his help.
You say dollars or cents?
This is a lot of work.
Dollars. It's 15 cents per thousand,
Gotcha.
so 100,000 is $15.
Anything else for the good of the
Cost
order?
for 6-pack.
Then motion. Motion.